We're in the fifth week of a series called Onesies. And the Onesies are books in the Bible with only one chapter. Dan started us off by preaching about Philemon, and then I got to preach on 2 John. Then Dan did 3 John, last week Jude. This week is Obadiah. Obadiah is one of the most terrifying books in the entire Bible. In fact, if you were to read Obadiah and you haven't read anything else, it could scare you so bad you would want to never read the Bible again. I want to encourage you that even though it's a concise book, even though it's only 21 chapters, it has a profound message for people like us. There's something about this book that is really powerful. The best way I know how to explain the book of Obadiah in a way that you can understand is through family relationships. Sibling rivalry is very painful. So are there anybody in this room that has brothers or sisters? Raise your hand. Okay, most of you do. You can go ahead and put your hands down. There's something about family that causes us great pain. In fact, in my opinion, the most pain that you can experience as a human being comes from your own family members. The reason that it happens that way is because it happens at such a young age, and it happens from people that you don't see it coming from, and you expect them to be trustworthy. Some of you in this room have experienced pain at the hands of your family in ways that I can hardly describe. Obadiah has a powerful message for anyone that has been hurt by their family members. In order for us to make sense of this book, we have to understand some of the characters. There were two characters in the Bible all the way back in Genesis. Their names were Jacob and Esau. They were twins. They were born at the same time. Esau comes out first, and they were fighting in the womb. Jacob had a hold of him, so he was born a couple seconds later. So Esau's the firstborn, and Jacob is the secondborn. Jacob had some descendants who are known as Israel. So when you see Israel in the book, they're the descendants of Jacob. Esau also had some descendants, and his descendants were named Esau. What took place for them is very painful. I want to read you just a short little teeny passage, and I'm only going to give you a couple details. If you want to go back and read it yourself, you can start in Genesis chapter 24 and read all the way up until the end of chapter 27. It'll give you some of these really crucial details for those of you that want to know more. But basically what happened was Esau tricked his brother out of his birthright, and then he stole his blessing. Him and his mom came together and took what was most meaningful from Esau. And it wasn't just the power, it wasn't just about money, it was about the blessing that he had longed for his entire life. He had stole it from him, and Esau held a grudge his entire life. I just want us to read this one verse that helps us understand where Esau is coming from. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The day of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother." What had happened to him was so painful that it caused him all kinds of pain. By the time the book of Genesis ends, Esau's a proud, defiant man moving towards his ultimate destruction. If you were to see at Target children completely in charge of their parents, would you be pleased with those parents? Would you admire them and want to emulate that behavior? There's something about us when we see things completely out of order that makes us not like the situation. We like it when parents are able to keep their children under control, and sometimes when we think of God, we think that God should let us do whatever we want. But I want to let you know up front that that's not what God is like. God is a God who's willing to discipline. And in fact, if you go to Hebrews, it says that God disciplines the children that he loves. That the reason that you're being disciplined is a sign that you are legitimate children, that you actually matter to God. In that same passage, he gives us a little bit of the details of what's going on in Esau that'll help us understand the book of Obadiah. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God and that no bitter root grows up. It is possible to miss out on God's grace. And Esau entirely missed out on everything God had for him. And the reason that he did is because he allowed a bitter root to grow. There's something that happens to us when we're hurt, especially when we're hurt bad, where bitterness starts to reside in us. Whenever we're disappointed, it can build into resentment, and then if we allow the offense to, it can turn into hatred. When a bitter root gets inside of your soul, it will destroy you from the inside out. It will cause trouble, and it will defile many people. Some people know exactly what I'm talking about because you have friends who have been hurt really bad, and they have allowed it to completely close them off from everybody around them. See to it that no one is sexually immoral or godless like Esau. I can't imagine being called godless, who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. He cared so little about what God had that he was willing to give it away for a bowl of soup. Afterwards, as you know, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. Even though he sought it with tears, he could not change what he had done. If you're hurt, and if you allow bitterness and resentment to grow, you will find yourself doing things that you will never be able to undo. There's a principle throughout this passage in Obadiah, and we come to it in verse 15. And if we understand this pattern, it will make so much sense out of the Bible. And here's the principle. As you have done, it will be done to you. God is just, and God will hold people accountable for what they do. Everyone will be judged according to their own actions. Everyone will be held accountable for what they do. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Do you believe that? Do you believe that one day God will hold every single person accountable for what they do? It's important to think about it. It doesn't really matter if you believe it or not because it's going to come true. One day, there is going to be a God that's going to hold every single person accountable. And that's what the book of Obadiah is about. And it makes us uncomfortable because we do not like it. If you're on the good side of justice, it works out really well for you and it's comforting. But if you're on the other side of the equation and you're the one that has to be judged or held accountable, we do not like it. I want you to think of the fact that God is just, kind of like gravity. It just is. What goes up must come down. God will hold people accountable. You can either leverage it for your benefit, or you can suffer the consequences if you try to circumvent it. It's just simply the way things are. One more thing that will really help you out and help you to understand what the book of Obadiah is about is these two brothers grew up. Jacob stole the blessing, and Esau became bitter, and that he told his children over and over how horrible his brother was. And it developed hatred and resentment, and they hated each other so much that they continued to cause all kinds of pain and grief. And when Israel as a nation went to the promised land, Edom would not even let them go through their land. And on the day of Jacob, Israel's worst nightmare, the day that came true, when the Babylonians came in, and I want you to think about this for a second because it's important that you understand how much pain they were in. If you miss this, the whole book doesn't make any sense. The Babylonians came into Israel in 586. They killed the king, slaughtered a lot of people, destroyed the temple, took all of their wealth, and then drugged the people away to Babylon. And instead of helping, Edom was standing on top of their hills, celebrating the fact that Israel was getting their just deserts. They were rejoicing, gloating, celebrating. Not only did they not do anything to help, but they were celebrating the fact. And the book of Obadiah is written to people living in captivity, poverty-stricken, without any hope, and they're so bitter, they're so filled with resentment because of what their brothers did to them and failed to do to them. And that is the context for the book of Obadiah, is Jacob's descendants are filled with bitterness towards Edom. That's where we go in chapter 1. The vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, "Rise up, let's go against her for battle." God, through Obadiah, is speaking to captives who are in poverty telling them that God has heard their prayer and he sent out angels and messengers to respond and to ultimately bring justice. Verse 2, see, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes, but I want you to see it here because you need to understand this for the book to make any sense. Verse 3, the pride, and talking about the pride of Edom, of your heart has deceived you. Pride has a way of deceiving you. Who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home in the heights. Who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? There's something about pride that elevates us to the point that we think that we can handle anything. Do you know anyone that's full of pride? Do you know anyone that's full of arrogance and that they're just hard to be around? They're just people that are just so full of themselves and they falsely elevate themselves so they think that they can accomplish anything. Imagine how arrogant you would have to say is, who can bring me down to the ground? We're going to find someone who's strong enough to bring him down to the ground, but that's not till later. Though you soar like eagles and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. They thought that their location had provided them security, and what they would do is they would live up in the mountains, and the only way into the city was a place that was so small that only 6 people could go together, and they thought their army was impenetrable, and there's nothing that could happen to them. If thieves come to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? A way to understand this is think about what it is that you're afraid of. Most of us are afraid that somebody might come and steal our stuff, right? Or we're afraid that people might manipulate us and take the things that are valuable. And what Obadiah says is even if they were to come and steal, they would only steal a few of your things, right? Even if they came and manipulated you and were able to take the fruit of your business away from you, even then they would only get a little bit of the profit. But there's something that you have to worry about that's way more than the stuff that we tend to worry about. We tend to worry about our property and our stuff and the things that we think matter to us. But Obadiah is saying that there's something that's significantly more valuable than that. But how Esau will be ransacked. His hidden treasures pillaged, something that's really important to him, he is going to lose. God is the only person that can determine your significance. Seeing as how we just came off of the 4th of July, a lot of people had family reunions. And raise your hand if sometime within the last year or two you've spent some significant time with your family members. Raise your hand. Okay, most of you. There's something about our family that we really long to spend time with them until we actually spend time with them. Once you spend time with them, all of a sudden it kind of triggers all kinds of crazy emotions. Have you ever wondered why, as an adult, when you spend time with your brothers and sisters, it just seems kind of ugly and messy and just really weird? I am convinced that the reason that takes place is that we want the people that matter to us to see us as important. We want them to acknowledge that we matter. We want them to see that we are capable, that we have succeeded. And there's something about brothers and sisters and moms and dads and family members who treat us a certain way, and they have a way of lowering us immediately, where we go in their presence and we want them to acknowledge that we matter, but they don't really do it. There's something inside every single person's soul that longs to have someone say that you matter. The problem that occurred with Esau, and I don't really have time to develop it, but if you understood it, it would make so much more sense. Esau longed for the blessing of his dad. From the time he was a boy, his dad loved him, and he was looking forward to the day when his dad would speak into his soul and tell him everything that mattered. And not only did his dad not speak into his soul, but he gave everything away to his brother, and it killed him. Not only did he want his mom to acknowledge that he was something, but his mom betrayed him so that his brother could get everything that he had, and it was so painful. Now, I want you to think for a second. Who is it in your life And whose opinion is more important than God's? What I want you to do is take out your phones, or if you're like my age, you have a pencil and a piece of paper with you. If you're like 50 and over, then you can write it down. If you're like 50 and under, what I want you to do is take out your phones, and I want you to think about this. This is really important. We're going to take some time here. Who is it in your life that's more important than God? I want you to really do this. This is important. For some of you, it's your dad. For some of you, you've tried your entire life to get your dad to acknowledge you, and no matter how hard you've tried, he never was willing to do it. For some of you, it's your mom, and your mom has spoken some hurtful, painful words into your soul. For some of you, it's a coach, or it's a brother, or a sister, or for some of you, it's your girlfriend. Or for some of you, it's your boyfriend, or maybe it's your spouse, or maybe it's your kids. Maybe you long to get your kids to see that you are a parent that really has something to bring to the table. And because they've been unwilling to give it to you, something is missing in your soul. Esau was trying desperately to be okay. And he was trying desperately to let everyone else around him know that he mattered. And that never took place in his soul, and it allowed him to be bitter and resentful. And I want you to take a second and identify, who is it in your world? Who is it that you're longing to hear that you matter, that you're worth something, that you're significant? Because for some of you, that is the defining thing that takes place in your soul. Write down that name, because we're going to come back to it in a little bit. Let's continue in Obadiah. Obadiah tells us what happens to Edom. And what's amazing is what Edom did is exactly what we do. Whenever people fail to acknowledge us and people fail to understand how much value we have, we do everything we can to artificially prop it up and to accomplish more and more things so people will notice us. Watch this. All of your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive you and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set up a trap to you, but you will not detect it. He thought that the alliances that he made and the nation of Edom thought that the people that they had strategically partnership would protect them. In that day, declares the Lord, will not I destroy the wise men of Edom, those of understanding in the mountains of Esau? Your warriors, Taman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. There's a pattern that runs throughout the Old Testament, and this pattern will help you understand all of the minor prophets, and especially the book of Obadiah. God cares about his kids, and God cares about his children, and whenever his children move away from him, God wants us to move close to him, wants all of his children to move in a way that's connecting. But whenever we turn our back and we start to move away, God will humble us. He will humble his children because they matter. Have you ever thought about why God might want to humble you or humble somebody else? There's something about a humble person that's willing to listen. There's something about a humble person that's willing to consider other options. If you refuse to move towards God and he's humbling you and it doesn't really help, he will dismantle his children. God has a way of taking all of the things that you've artificially propped up and taking them out one by one by one. And there's something about that makes us really uncomfortable. The rest of the pattern is there's bad news and then there's good news. The bad news is if you're moving away from God, he might have to humble you and he might have to dismantle you. But the good news is if you're moving towards God, he will deliver you. And not only will he deliver you, but if you become humble, he will exalt you. That's a pattern throughout the entire Old Testament. God has the ability to humble. And I could show you probably 8 verses in here. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. In verse 2, it says, I will make you small. Esau was moving away from God. He was becoming bitter and resentful and self-reliant and proud. And he thought that he was all that. And God was forced to humble him by making him small. God said, I will bring you down. And God doesn't bring people down because he's some egomaniac. He does it because he wants to humble people so that they will come and move towards him. Oftentimes, we see God as a kitten, We love it when people describe God as loving and caring and compassionate, and all of us love to hear that God wants a close relationship to us. But did you know that there's hundreds, doesn't even want to go there. There's hundreds of passages, especially in the Old Testament, where God is willing to do the hard things, and God is willing to dismantle people if they're unwilling to move in His direction. I don't like talking about hard topics, and I know it makes you uncomfortable, and people aren't going to be happy that we spent time talking about this part of God, but it's true. There is something that's true, and if I failed to present this to you, I wouldn't be fairly accurate about what the Bible says. God is just, and He will hold every single person accountable, especially His children, because He loves them. God is willing to dismantle people if they're willing and they continue to walk away from Him. It's just true, just like gravity. In verse 6, and I could show you the whole pattern, is Esau will be ransacked. He will be destroyed. He will be dismantled because of his unwillingness. Will I not destroy the wise men of Edom? And as you go all the way down, he says, I will have to wipe them off the face of the earth. And we hate that. It's so uncomfortable. And it makes us cringe in our soul because we do not like looking at that part of God. But it's true. What was it about the nation of Edom and the person Esau that made them miss out on God's grace? I think it has to do with pride and self-reliance. The promise of pride is that if I can get the people around me to see me as important, then I'll be happy. If I can get the people that I care about to notice me and to adore me and to appreciate me, then it will bring me a sense of satisfaction and happiness. And that's what causes so much trauma in our souls. Pride is elevating yourself to a place where you matter. And self-reliance is saying, I can do it myself. But it's nauseating to God, and you can't stand it in anyone else, right? I want you to think about this for a second if you're a parent. Is there anything that irritates you more than your kids being entitled and thinking that they deserve everything? Is there anything that makes you just want to cringe and just stop your kids in their track than them being so full of pride and arrogance that they demand their way and they treat you with disrespect? I want you to think about it just for a second. If you're secure, you don't have to prove it to anybody. But if you're insecure, then you have to prove it to everybody. Some of you, when people challenge you or question you or disrespect you, you explode in so much anger because how dare you treat me like that? You're longing for something and you want someone to give you the approval that your soul is longing for, and it's missing. And I want to say to you that you cannot get it on your own, and other people will not be able to speak it into your souls. It goes on and it describes exactly why God had to humble the nation of Edom. God cares about our attitudes and our behaviors. And the best way to know if you're full of bitterness and resentment is what you do when the person that hurt you gets what's coming to them. You've got bitterness and resentment in your soul if the person that gets humbled causes you to celebrate and gloat and rejoice and be so happy that they were punished. Watch what happens. Because of the violence you did against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You'll be destroyed forever. Wow, those are scary words. On that day, you stood aloof. There's something about superiority. There's something about self-righteousness. There's something about gloating and rejoicing and boasting over other people that tells us that we're full of bitterness and resentment and hurt. I want to take a second and just speak to some of you that have been hurt by your family members. Some of you were hurt in such deep ways that you can't even describe it to other people. And what Obadiah is saying to a group of captives that are in poverty, that have been hurt beyond belief, that don't let the bitterness and the resentment grow to the place where it will destroy everything that matters to you. Some of you have been hurt so badly and you want to get back at them. You want to punish the people that hurt you. And you want to prove to everyone around you that you matter. It won't get what you're really looking for. Even if you are to prove to them that you matter, it won't assuage what is going on in your soul. The only one that can do that is God himself. If we had more time, I would develop the second half of this book, and it talks about where our security lies. And that the only one that we can trust is God himself. But what I want you to sit with is, who is it that defines your sense of significance? Because the only one that can is God. You see, for Esau, he missed the blessing of his father, and it caused him to become bitter and resentful and proud and arrogant, and it cost him everything. What about you? What are you going to do with that hurt? What are you going to do with that pain? You see, the second part of the pattern that goes in Obadiah is that God has a way of exalting people who are humble. God has a way of stepping in and bringing justice. And some of you are saying, but they hurt me and it was wrong. Would you consider letting God bring about the justice that one day he will bring? Because if God brings justice, it will come about in a way that it needs to. And if you allow yourself to be humble, then God can exalt you. There's something about a humble person that allows them to be trustworthy so that God can give them what they truly need. I don't want to minimize your pain, and I'm not telling you to ignore it. What I'm asking you to do is to release it, to let it go, and to let God speak over your soul what it is you truly want to hear. Would you pray with me? Dear God, pride and self-reliance are two of the highest values of the culture that we live in. And there's so many people around us that are artificially placing themselves in positions that are going to cause you to have to humble them. God, help us to see you for who you are and allow us to allow you to speak into our souls. God, I pray that today might be the day that people release the pain, that they get rid of the bitterness and the resentment and the pride and the self-reliance, and turn to the only one that can give them what they truly need. God, I pray that you would help us as a church to be humble so that you can deliver us and exalt us to the place that you truly want us to be. In Jesus' precious and holy name, amen.